Hey, it's Jeremy from OpticHouse.com. So, if you've watched any of my drawing videos before, you've probably come across several videos on the topic of thumbnailing. You're aware that I am a big proponent of using thumbnailing to plan out your pieces and help figure out how to design an image so that it will be compelling and interesting and work out a lot of your problems beforehand so you're not, getting screwed when you're in the middle of a piece. However, I have not mentioned this before because this is the first time I noticed it in the middle of a drawing video. I may have mentioned it in other ones because it does happen sometimes, but thumbnailing can be used to solve a problem piece. You can use it to fix a problem on something that's a work in progress, and instead of starting from scratch, you may say, oh wait, if I sit down and I do a few sketches, I can actually figure out in what way this piece is broken and what's the best way to fix it. Now that happened with the piece that we're looking at right now. The nice thing is I sat down and tried to work out a lot of the perspective and trying to really make this part of the town feel like an environment. And I was so focused on the composition of the buildings and the sense of space and the environment that I did not pay proper attention to lighting when I was doing my planning. And lighting really is a big part of storytelling. It can really give you a sense of mood and action. It helps define your lights and darks in terms of like the actual visual composition of the page, leading your eye through the page with light and dark. So what happened here in this page is that this is a scene that's supposed to take place in the pre-dawn hours. As I was going through and drawing, there's a lot of detail in here, crates, the windows, the wood panels on the side of the building. I hadn't necessarily figured out how exactly I was going to convey the time of day that it was taking place. Like, it's supposed to be early morning, like pre-dawn, let's say like between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. It's not light yet, but it will be light soon. So dark, not full-on starlight. And I tried to, this is another thing that I've been playing with, or actually struggling with, is how much detail to do in the final ink drawing page when I know that I'm going to come back in and add tones in Photoshop. And I am of the belief that whenever possible, you should try to make your finished drawing page, the artwork that's on the finished artboard, feel as much like a complete work of art, a complete finished illustration as possible, regardless of how much digital work you're going to add later, regardless of how much painting you're going to do, regardless of whether it's going to be in marker, watercolor, acrylic, Photoshop, what have you. Because I feel like the more that the original drawing feels like a finished piece, that's like half the battle right there. When you have an original, your ink drawing feels complete, then anything you add to it, it's just, it's icing. It gives it a little bit more light, a little bit more volume, a little bit more depth. But if that finished thing feels like what it's supposed to feel like, you've already accomplished a large part of the battle. Now, the challenge when we get into doing lighting in Photoshop is that in order to do lighting, in order to get the most out of Photoshop, I won't say that it's an absolute because there are no absolutes. There's some artists, there's some colorists who can do amazing work with artists that use heavy blacks and spot heavy blacks, and there's some artists that do amazing work where they do a lot of the heavy lifting for their collaborators by working on somebody who does an open line style where they're not spotting blacks, they're not filling things in, and it's really simply the contours of the objects. If you draw a shoe, you're not drawing the shadow on the shoe. You're drawing the outline of the shoe, the eyelets, the laces. You're drawing the details, but you're not putting shadow on them. Or maybe you're only putting a little bit of suggestion in it. That's usually called a clean line style. And my challenge, I guess, is where do I go heavy on the inks and the blacks, which is more of how I naturally draw, whereas going light on them and leaving room for the Photoshop. And on top of that, also, when I am doing artwork that has a clean line look to it, making sure that it feels finished. Like, there are some artists who, if they were to do a coloring book, you could look at their piece, look at the finished art, and even though it's a coloring book with just contoured lines and detail lines and no shadow or no fills, you'd say, yeah, this looks like it feels like a finished artwork. Then there's some artists who would do that, and if they didn't spot any blacks, you would say, well, this piece is only half done. And that's on me to do the research in terms of how to stylistically convey that, both in terms of how it's been done historically, how other artists have done it, and also for how I'm going to do it. Now, something that right here, one of the problems you're going to see me go back and fix later on, is I just filled in the sky and made it black. In this entire piece, I went through and I made it a night sky because essentially it's taking place before sunrise, so, it's still dark, right? Correct theory? However, like I said, thumbnailing isn't just for the finished piece. In an ideal world, you should work out all of your lighting beforehand, but let's say you come across some lighting problems later on. I went back and I did a couple of thumbnails, and I'm going to point them out to you because you're only going to see them for like a minute, and they're going to be off to the side of the page. But I sat down and I did little thumbnails working out the lighting. And it was after I had already gotten as far in the piece as we see. It's like I had gotten to what we're seeing now, which is pretty far along in the page, and said, wait, the lighting isn't working, this is wrong. And I did two different versions. I did a version where the sky is black and you can see the detail of the town as more lighter. And then I did a second version where it was inversed, where the sky is light and then all of the buildings are mostly silhouette and you can see a little bit of detail in them. And I just wanted to compare the two. And it took me probably less than 10 minutes to do the two little sketches that you will see off to the side. But by doing those little thumbnails, it helped me figure out, okay, this is what my lighting plan should be, and this is what I should have figured out before I started. But now that I know this, I can go back in and rework the page to match the lighting that actually feels like pre-dawn, just in terms of the ink stage. And I actually put in the final page, and when you get to the end of this video, you'll see the final page that went in the comic books. You can see what I did with Photoshop really was just laying gray over the whole thing and letting the ink work do most of the heavy lifting. But a big part of that was me realizing that I needed to make the buildings much more in silhouette and shadow. See, there it is over to the right. You can see where I've got where the sky is black, and then you see like the figures in white, you see a little bit of detail. And yeah, then I scooted over a little bit more. Now you can see the one that's on the very far right, that is the one that I looked at and said, this feels like pre-dawn to me. With a light sky, but then having everything else almost completely in shadow. That felt like what I wanted to do. And this was a point where I was saying, okay, based on that, I could make all of the area that's white, put in gray in there instead of white, and it would give me the effect that I was hoping to get visually. So then I went back into this page and was painting out all of the sky in all the places where you could see it. And side note for those that are tool and process geeks, because I know someone's going to ask me, and when I say geeks, I say that affectionately because I'm a process geek and I'm an art tool geek, so take no offense. I'm speaking to my brethren. But I'm using Liquitex titanium white to fill all these in. A lot of comic artists traditionally, from when I started studying comic book art tools, would use Pro White, which is a brand name. I forget who the makers are. But my jar of Pro White was all dried up because I haven't used it in a long-ass time. So I just had to go grab some acrylic paint that I had. And so this is the finished page, and it's just a lot more black, still leaving the detail that I had in the buildings, but at the same time, very much strong silhouettes. And that gave me sort of the tone and the sense of mystery and gloom that I wanted, then filling in what would have been white with gray. And all that because as I was going through the process, I sat down and said, I'm in pretty deep on this page, but something's broken. Let me thumbnail it out. So, like I said, thumbnailing is essential at the beginning stages of planning a piece. But even when you're pretty far along, if you find yourself hitting roadblocks, if something's wrong and it's not working, before you start from scratch, before you trash the whole piece, sit down, do some thumbnails, and see if you can figure out how to fix what's wrong. That's it for now. Check out my website, optichouse.com. If you enjoy these videos, please share them. Also, sign up for my weekly newsletter to get a free digital download and see what else I'm working on. Go be creative.